Okay, so for Barfield, essentially humanity goes from what he calls original participation, and I'll talk about that in a minute, through to the current state, which really was at its peak probably during actually the 19th century, but it actually produced science. And then there's a further stage he imagines, which we might be at the beginning of now, called final participation. Essentially, this is what happened. Oh yeah, and the other thing you have to remember is there is no consciousness without phenomena, and no phenomena without consciousness. In fact, he says that nature emerges when we first start speaking, that nature and language emerge together. And you get that echoes of that in Eden, right, where Adam names the animals. You get that sense of, although there are differences, obviously. So anyway, so what does this mean? Well, if you go back far enough, what Barfield claims is there's a point at which what is happening in nature and in man is indistinguishable. Nature and man are one. You can't distinguish between the two. Over time, there's this kind of splitting of a unity into a subjective pole and an objective pole. So you get the I, okay, on one side, the self, the perceiving self, and you get phenomena on the other. So you get consciousness, self-consciousness. Now, through the early pagan times and even in medieval times, there's a sense in which the self, but the idea of the porous self, it's something Charles Taylor talks about this in A Secular Age, where he says for the medievals, they had a porous self. They were hugely influenced by the things around them. The self wasn't buffered, he calls, but it's really right. It's exactly out of Barfield. And he never cites, which I think is kind of rude. But anyway, so eventually, the poles get so far apart between the self and the objects out there that we forget that they're connected. Because in original participation, this is what happens. Human beings sense that out there and behind the phenomena and inside us is the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's super sensible. It connects it. So we participate in the objects, but we're both participating in the divine. So this is why it's actually original participation that's closest to Williams's idea of co-inherence. So that's an interesting connection.
Interesting.
But what Barfield says is that's paganism. Okay? So I think
Williams is a pagan to Barfield.
I would actually say that there's some truth in that. And I think that's why Kierkegaard was so therapeutic for Williams, because he really insisted on the difference between Christianity and paganism. He wanted to emphasize the discontinuity. But anyway, so what happens at the height of the scientific revolution is that we've forgotten that there's a link between us, and even by severing the link, we've produced the things that we take as given. So for Barfield, there is no history of phenomena. You can't talk about a solid world that existed before human beings. Okay, there was no world. So for Barfield, it's not that so our story, and he calls it mechanomorphic idols smashing against idols, that they've been banging into each other for a couple of billion years, and then, woohoo, magically they produce consciousness. For Barfield, it's that consciousness actually produces eventually the separation between the subject and the object, and that we experience things as unparticipated, that this is where contemporary physics, he makes, especially in Saving the Appearances, Barfield makes a big deal out of this, because there is the observer problem, right? That you cannot know both, say, position and velocity of a particle. Mm-hmm. And by testing it, you determine it. Same thing it happens with light when you look at wave function and particle function and so forth. So physics has actually run into the recognition that we do participate, whatever that reality is at that level. But what Barfield always wants to claim is we forget that we also participate in the world. Barfield says that what the pagans recognized is that what we see represented in the world is us. It's not something alien. It is, in fact, we're seeing whatever is common to us, and it is what's out there. So Barfield says that even now, listen to this craziness. He says that nature is our unconscious.
Because of how we've separated ourselves from it.
Yeah. And so the goal for Barfield is to make it more conscious. So essentially, the incarnation comes into all this. Another way to think about it is in terms of, I'll do it in terms of meaning, and I'll do it in terms of the divine. In paganism, in the original participation, the meaning is out there, the divine is out there, it's in the world. It's also in us, but it's essentially out there too. It all gets contracted into modernism, and there's nothing inside or outside. So meaning becomes a huge problem. With final participation, there's now no meaning outside. Any meaning that we're going to provide is going to come from inside. So there is no God out there underscoring what's going to happen. And that's huge, underwriting it. So, and he quotes Coleridge in one place. He says, we get from nature what we bring to it through our imagination.